Now, the last major category of goods that we'll be talking about is so-called public goods. Goods that are neither excludable nor rivalrous. Now, in reality, pure public goods likely don't exist because anything can be made excludable by spending resources. For example, like I told you about the road, a road would be non-excludable until you put a toll booth on it, but the toll booth carries its own cost. But you could have a situation where the cost of excludability could be so high, like the idea of fencing in the Great Plains with wooden fences, or there could be huge positive externalities that are like a substitute for the good, which will make the private market impractical. If someone's consumption of the good can at least partially fulfill another person's need for it, then you'll run into a situation where normally we would like to subsidize it. We would simply apply a Pigouvian subsidy. Yet, the increased quantity actually disincentivizes consumption. And so a subsidy is going to be insufficient for purposes of raising the level of production. The problem here is going to be underproduction due to shirking. And the logic of it goes like this. The good is non-rivalrous and non-excludable. If you provide it to anybody, anybody else can take from it. And it doesn't cost anything to provide it to more people. Because it doesn't cost anything to provide it to more people, you would like to provide it to as many people as possible. It would actually be more efficient. The costs aren't going to go up, but the benefits would. You want to give it to everyone. But for each potential payer, they know if I don't buy it, I can still get it from someone who does. Why should I contribute if I'm going to get the benefit anyways? Especially if there are a lot of people and my contribution doesn't make a big difference by itself. And much like how our tragedy of the commons suffers from this coordination problem, where some people thinking that way makes it true for other people, here, if you have free riders, then other people face more of an incentive, both morally and economically, to be a free rider themselves. And so if everyone does this, then the good or service doesn't get provided. We call this free riding, just like you would call someone a free rider in your day-to-day life. This is one case where the economics term pretty much means the exact same thing as what it would mean to you. You're a freeloader. You know that you can ride in my car and not have to chip in for the gas. And so you always take advantage of me. Well, here, the market is going to break down. You can't get people to pay. So nobody pays, so nothing gets done. Now, most of our public goods are going to deal with emergency services and other basic functions of the government. Let's start with firefighting as an example. Now, technically, you could be excludable with it by letting some houses burn and others not. You could have a subscription-based firefighting service where if you didn't pay your subscription, the firefighters stand around. They let your house burn down to the ground in front of them. But if that fire spreads to a neighbor who did pay, then they put theirs out. Does that sound silly? Well, you know by this point that whenever I ask that, it's rhetorical. This was how firefighting used to work in America. I strongly recommend watching a movie called The Gangs of New York. And it depicts, this silliness. You'd have different fighting brigades, private ones. And sometimes they often worked like street gangs in that they would both show up to a place and then try to sell their service to someone as their house is burning down. They're trying to wring the money out of them. Kind of, they got them by the balls. And if two different brigades pulled up to the same house, they were likely to have a fist fight. And then this would happen all the time. They would be brawling it out while people's homes, burned to the ground. So yeah, it can be excludable. The problem with it though is that there's heavy spillovers. See, if two properties are too close to each other, then a fire in one can spread to another. And when you're talking about dense cities, especially old cities, but even today this is true, the fires, usually the properties are right next to each other. In an era before cars, you don't have houses spaced out like you've got them now. And so it was much more efficient if everyone in an area, if all adjacent properties were all subscribed to the same service. But you run into problems. People might be subscribing to different services. And secondly, if all of your neighbors subscribe to a service, you might not want the service yourself as much. There's still a chance that the fire could begin in your home. There's also the chance that the firefighters might not be able to put out adjacent fires before they spread to you. But you know that if your neighbors pay, then the odds of your house burning down are lower. And so a cheapskate or a poorer person might not chip in. Well, now their house is a danger to everyone around them. The problem was that effective firefighting requires everyone to be on board. And fires aren't just a thing of the past. For the most part, they are, right? You think of your great big fires like the London fire, the Chicago fire. That goes back to the days when homes were still mostly wood. I mean, they're still mostly wood now, but you get what I mean. They still happen every now and then, though. Like, look up the campfire that they had in California years ago. That was crazy. Whole town got burned up. California's a hellhole. Between the earthquakes, the fires, gosh, it's supposed to be one of the most beautiful places in the U.S. to live. I've been to San Diego, but I am glad to live in a place where I don't have to deal with hurricanes and earthquakes and big tornadoes. We get the tornadoes here, but we don't, not like they do out on the plains. Anyways, I lost my train of thought. I do this a lot more in the in-person class. It's more fun. I had a funny for y'all about Captain Planet and Ted Turner, but it's just these videos, they just don't really lend themselves to like jokes and stuff much. Well, anyways, with firefighting strategy, you have to be able to create fire breaks. You have to be able to tear structures down if necessary, to dynamite things if necessary. You have to be able to go in like you're fighting a battle and do whatever you need to do to stop that fire from spreading. And you can't be constrained by whether or not somebody has paid their bill. But if you can't deny someone service because they didn't pay their bill, nobody's going to want to pay for the service. So private firefighting was viable. They did have profitable firefighting brigades, but the service sucked. It was really crappy, and we're much better off for having public firefighters now. You would not want to go back to those gangs in New York days. It's a great movie. You really should watch it. Well, here's another similar problem: public sanitation. Now, people volunteer to an extent. Like a public good can be ameliorated a bit by altruism, just like how a negative externality can be reduced by people's altruism, or a positive externality can be increased. Well, if people are altruistic, that helps. I'm an economist, which means I'm a pessimist about human nature. I would not rely on that. Well, I told you about how the American Indian was unable to control his rapacious greed, just like the white man was unable to control his rapacious greed, despite having a religion that prioritized nature and preservation. Well, look at this crap down here. You know what that building is in the background? Yeah, that's the Taj Mahal in India. One of their wonders of the world. Kind of like I mean, I think of that as being like the symbol of India, just like we would think of the Statue of Liberty as being the symbol of the US. And this river is the Ganges, a sacred river to the Hindu religion. See all this trash? This really isn't selling the extent of the problem either. Because I mean, like, yeah, you could find a picture of trash anywhere, but it's not uncommon for people to see dead bodies floating down the Ganges River, just sheer sewage, like thick Charles Dickens Victorian London levels of sewage on the river at all times, trash everywhere over it. It's their country's own sacred river, but it's not that doesn't stop them from, you know, from devastating it. You run into this problem with public sanitation. In some cases, trash removal is a completely viable private good. If a person has, for example, a trash collector who picks up the trash from their own house, that's private. But if you're talking about cleaning up a river or cleaning up a street, if you're talking about cleaning up something that's in a sort of public space, there's no way to provide the service to some people without providing it to everyone. Imagine if you had a sanitation company that operated by the same logic as those private firefighters brigades. If you've got a good paying citizen walking along, then you hustle out there, you clean up all the trash, and you get out of their way. They have a good experience. They had a nice, clean walk. Then you see some dirty, filthy, non-paying customer come along. One of those would-be free riders. Well, you can't just give him the service, or again, they'll never want to pay. So you've got to take that trash and you dump it back out. You open up the trash bag and you spew it in front of them. And then you clean it up again the next time a paying customer comes along. It's absurd, right? And the scenario is supposed to be absurd. Something like a private street cleaner is never going to work. You might have contractors. You might have a government that sells the job to clean the streets up. They don't necessarily have to be city employees. But street cleaning and other types of cleanup efforts like that, they kind of have to be a government program. Now, the strongest arguments for public goods come up in law enforcement, defense, and scientific research. And we'll focus on the law enforcement and defense side first. So with law enforcement, you cannot expect people to protect you. The reaction time is slow. Garrisoning people everywhere is impractical. Like, I hope you all understand. If you ever get attacked or like robbed or something, the cops aren't going to be there. You're lucky if the cops happen to be there. You can't assume that they will. Even in a big city, they're going to be minutes away at best, but generally assume like 15 minutes. And if you're in the countryside, it could be like an hour. And even if the cops are on the scene, you can't rely on them to protect you at the time. That's been tried in US courts already. It's been established that you have no right to protection. In the particular court trial, it was some cops on a New York sub that watched as a guy got stabbed. But more recently, I tend to think of the Uvalde shooting and what's it called? Parkland, I think. Parkland as well. Um, yeah, you got kids in there dying, and cops are standing around outside waiting. Cops don't exist to protect you. My father was a police officer. He was deputy police chief up in Dayton, Ohio. He'll tell you, you have to defend yourself in this world. Nobody else is going to do it for you. So why do you have them? What they exist for, what all of it exists for, the police, the courts, the prisons, is to remove the criminal after the fact. Unless you were willing to put a cop on every street corner, a cop in every house, you would never be able to prevent the crimes. The best thing you can do is remove the criminal once they have revealed themselves to be a criminal. And that's the function of it. It's not about rehabilitating them. It's not about punishing them. It's not about getting some kind of justice, whatever that means. It's that you have people that can't be trusted in society. They're crazy. They're cruel. They're psychopaths. They're worthless. They just don't want to have a job, and so they live on other people's wealth. Whatever the case, they have demonstrated that they neither deserve to walk free, nor can be trusted to walk free. And so we create the prison as a dumping grounds to set them and forget them. And for the very worst, you liquidate them. If you're pretty sure that they really did it and what they did was especially heinous, you kill them. That's not about justice. It's about saving the cost to the public. But the problem with this is you can't remove the criminal from society for only part of society. You can't take that guy out for paying customers, but not do it for other customers. So something like a private security firm, these exist, right? They're common, especially in gated communities. They might sit out there. They might have some dude that, you know, sits out there with his gun and his baton and waits for burglars to come through, and then he scares them off. Maybe if he's really lucky, he even gets to catch one and turn them over to the cops. But the private security firm isn't going to throw the criminal into a prison. They're not going to have their own private prison that they also run. We do have private prisons in this country. I don't think, actually, you know, I don't think any of them are operated by a private security firm, but I never thought about this. You could potentially have a viable business model. Oh, no. Right? That's like contracting. That's another type of contracting. It's the government is the one paying for the prison. They're just providing service. Anyways, if you take that guy off the streets, you're taking him off the streets for everyone. The closest you can get to like discriminating between payers and non-payers is if you banish them from a neighborhood. But even then, like it would have to be done at the neighborhood level, and the guy can always sneak back in. If it was a gated community, he probably snuck in the first place. If you go and shoot him, dump him in the river, probably dump him in that river. Well, he's not bothering anybody. This is going to be about as close to a pure public good as you can get. Again, remember, the police are not your bodyguard. Your police are the criminal liquidators. They're the criminal removal professionals. And they can't remove that criminal without giving that service to everyone that might have been a victim of the criminal. So there's no realistic way that you make that private. You pretty much have to have a government to do it. And it's going to work the same way with military defense. You can compare defense to firefighting in that it runs into the same problem. You're not going, you're the captain, he's not going to be looking over maps saying, oh, okay, I would like to set up a defensive line here. And we need artillery on this ridge, and I need infantry over here, and we've got to hold this bridge. Oh, but we can't hold this choke point because this secret path that leads like right to our rear, leads right to our headquarters. Yeah, we can't put any troops there because the guy that owns the house, he doesn't pay, right? He doesn't subscribe to us. You're not going to be a very great commander if you're working off constraints like that. Same problem as a fire. You have to defend whatever you have to defend, and there can be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The nature of law and defense as the ultimate public good is what's going to define a state in the first place. Well, when I say state, that essentially means a government plus the population and land over which the government rules. So, like the United States are a state, the state of South Carolina is a state, France is a state, Russia is a state. A state is a monopoly on violence. It's the guy with the biggest gun who, because he has the biggest gun, is able to tell everyone else what to do. He might allow other people to use their gun on occasion, but if they do so, it's because he allows it. The police, the army, that is the core of any government. That's all a government is at the end of the day. In part because if a government doesn't have an effective police force, it has no way to enforce its will on a population. A lot of people may obey the law out of a belief that it's the right thing to do, but a lot of people only obey the law because they're afraid of the consequences. You take the cops away, you take the army away for the external version of this, and your society falls apart. Now, for science, excludability is foolish. Now, while education itself is a private good, right? It is private. It's rivalrous. If you want to have more students, you have to have more teachers. It might be non-rivalrous up until you hit like the capacity of the room, but after that, you'd have to have more teachers. And it is excludable. You can run a private school. You can have a private university. You just say, oh, well, if you're not willing to pay your tuition, you're not allowed to go here. So education may be publicly provided, but it's not a public good in the sense that we're talking about. But the concepts that are taught in a school are themselves non-rivalrous. It might take more teachers to teach more students, but there's not a finite amount of calculus that you can teach. You don't have to invent more calculus to teach calculus to more people. You don't have to invent more physics to teach physics to more people, right? Once an idea has been created, the sharing of the idea may itself have some cost, but the idea can be shared as much as you want. And in practice, science grows bit by bit by the efforts of many individuals. Especially in our culture, we're very attracted to the idea of heroic scientists. But while you do have very influential figures like your Einsteins, your Newtons, all of them, none of these men do what they do entirely on their own, right? Einstein didn't wake up one day and invent all of physics by himself. They're always building on other people's work. Actually, I think it might have been Einstein who had the quote about standing on the shoulders of giants. They collaborate with each other heavily. And you often get these unpredictable little breakthroughs here and there, which, some of them can lay dormant for a long time before people realize how they're useful. But it's just a million little breakthroughs, and every now and then you'll get some magical moment where there'll be a huge breakthrough, but it's all interconnected. Nobody does science by themselves. And it would be impossible to logically enforce patents on concepts anyways. Now, we've actually started to run into problems with this, but we'll talk about patents more in the next topic, competition. But I assume a patent is like a monopoly, essentially. The government says you have the exclusive right to use this. Well, we're starting to run into problems where people are trying to copyright or patent. They're trying to patent things like a musical scale or a certain gene when it's something that occurs in nature, right? They may have been the first person to like discover it, but it's something that exists in nature by itself. You don't have to mingle your own labor with it to make it real. And I'm really, really hoping that the government cracks down on this and they say, no, you're not allowed to patent, you know, you're not allowed to patent a naturally occurring gene. Well, you can imagine just how bad it would get if people were able to patent theories. So you say, oh, Einstein invented the theory of general relativity. And I'm not a hard science guy, but I think he invented quantum mechanics too, didn't he? Okay, I just pulled it up. Max Planck apparently invented quantum mechanics. Well, imagine something like your modern day quantum computer that they've just started developing. And suppose if Max Planck were still around and he had a patent on quantum mechanics. So he could say, "Oh, you're not allowed to invent a quantum computer because your computer only functions because of quantum mechanics, which I discovered." Firstly, you would face this problem that people would they would definitely have an incentive to lie. It's like if you could demonstrate that you might make arguments like, oh well, I didn't know that it operated off of these natural principles. You know, I didn't know that it does that. I created a quantum computer by trial and error, right? You'd run into problems like this. And then again, science often moves in mysterious ways. You have these weird little connections, between different parts of the natural world. And if you had to go and buy patent rights for random scientific theories that like you don't even know which ones you're going to need, it would all fall apart. You would create an environment where the efficiency of research would be so hampered, it would be so low that research would basically be impossible. So science, we're better off thinking of it as being more of a public good, that it should not be excludable, and it's not rivalrous, and it should not be excludable. And so, if it's a public good, that means that it's efficient to publicly provide it. See, you arguably have more justification for funding public research labs and universities than you do for roads. I support having private roads. I have no problem with that, but actually, I hate it. I feel like I've been violated every time I have to pay a toll. Usually it's in the north. They're lousy for the things. But yeah, I mean there's a case to be made that universities on purely economic reasoning, they're actually better off. It's better to fund those with tax money than it is roads and infrastructure. Because the roads and infrastructure, it'll get built anyways. If there's a profit you can make doing it, it'll happen. We'll talk about natural monopolies in the next lecture. That's one of the reasons why you generally wouldn't want to have private roads. I think you probably know where I'm going with it. They can jack up the price arbitrarily high. So in general, pure public goods are rare if they exist at all. But anywhere there's potential for free riding, there can be an impure public good that requires subsidization or government provision. And few things the government provides are actually public goods in the economic sense. That might be an interesting challenge for you. Like, think up some programs the government does, and figure out are they excludable and rivalrous, and then evaluate them. Should they be public using that kind of logic? Much of what the government does is not. But this lays out our theory for essentially why you do sometimes need a government. Sometimes you have to have them to provide things like courts. So, in conclusion, while most of our economic analysis is of private goods, there are other types of goods prone to different types of market failure. There is a spectrum of excludability and a spectrum of rivalry. And most of our problems come about when these goods are non-excludable. Because if you can't force people to pay, then the market isn't going to be able to work. You're not going to get this decentralized automatic planning that we depend on so much. If it's non-excludable and non-rivalrous, then we call those public goods, and they'll be underprovided due to free riding. So you need to have a government step in, force people to pay, and then give them the good. And if it's rivalrous and non-excludable, we call that a commons good. They tend to get a tragedy of the commons where a lack of ownership drives overproduction, and you would want to introduce a private property right. Because once it's private property, people have an incentive to take care of it. Both of these are caused by a failure of the price mechanism to coordinate people's actions. There is no effective price because there is no market in the first place. And then finally, we will conclude our market failures unit by looking at monopolies, monopsonies, cartels, and collusion. And some of these are a little out of date. I've been filling them in as I go along, but we're also going to be talking a bit about what I usually call profit-seeking strategies, like just competitive strategies in general. How do businesses try to survive in a world where the rate of profit tends to fall? But I'll see you in the next one.